and gentlemen, the word Terroristan has often been used disparagingly to refer to failed states such as Pakistan or Taliban-ruled Afghanistan. But I begin this debate by placing this motion in front of the House, you dear viewers that is, that the real Terroristan in today's world is none other than Trudeau's Canada. Please refer to the visuals that you will see on your screen now. A group of thugs wielding sticks barging into the Hindu Sabha Mandir in Brampton in Canada's Ontario province. Again, look at these visuals closely. There's no provocation that leads to these attacks. At least there's no physical provocation. These goons just break the gate down and start attacking devotees of the Hindu temple who run to try to flee away from the spot. Finally, I want you to observe what we have highlighted right now, the flags that are being wielded by these thugs. Do I really need to tell you who these goons are? Ladies and gentlemen, these are Khalistani thugs, plain and simple. You know it, I know it, the Indian government knows it, the Indian High Commission in Canada knows it. And yes, even Mr. Trudeau and his political coterie know it. But they dare not say it. Now, viewers, do refer to these statements that we have collated and we are going to put out on your screen. From the Prime Minister to his main political rival to a sea of Desi MPs, they all have the same platitudes you see on your screens. Acts of violence are unacceptable, we are deeply disappointed, such acts have no presence in Canadian society, blah, blah, blah. Do you notice something else? None of these statements, none of these leaders have the guts to mention who actually carried out that attack. Khalistani terrorists. Not one of them mentions the word Khalistani separatism in their statements. Instead, look at Mr. Trudeau's priorities. As we speak, there hasn't been a single arrest yet in the cowardly attack in Brampton. Not a single arrest. Yet when the Hindus decided to protest the attack, they were suppressed by the Canadian police. And just by the way, if you look at the bottom of your screens, you can see a list of similar attacks by Khalistani vandals on Hindu temples in Canada. For the record, what Brampton saw yesterday is the 11th such attack in the past 2 years. Which brings me back to my question. With a deeply radicalized extremist influence and a spectacularly inept political leadership, is Canada now the new Terroristan? You know who actually feels the same? It's none other than the Prime Minister of India. Because we've got breaking news coming in at this point. The Prime Minister has condemned the attack on the temple in Canada. The Prime Minister has termed the temple attack to be deliberate and cowardly. He has said in a statement that these are attacks which will not weaken our resolve and that the Canadian government must ensure justice. We expect the Canadian government to uphold the rule of the law. Can they really do so? Let's put that across to my guests who are joining me at this point on the debate. We have Terry Milewski, senior Canadian journalist, Dr. Swasti Rao, foreign and defense expert, Prithpal Singh Baliwal, who is the spokesperson of the BJP, and Veena Sikri, former ambassador. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me on this important show at this point here. Mr. Milewski, let me begin with you. Surely at this point, sir, what is happening in Brampton, what has been happening across Canada for a while now, can no longer be seen as something which has been imported by India, as some of perhaps conservative leaders in Canada are trying to portray it. The fact is that what we saw in Brampton was an attack by Canadian nationals on Canadian soil. It is now an internal security threat. Why then are we seeing the Canadian political leadership across all parties pussyfoot around the problem?
I think they just don't get it. It's a very simple answer, and I'll explain what I mean. They don't get that the supposed political influence of the Khalistanis in Canada, although it has been going on for 40 years, they don't get that it's vastly exaggerated. They think that they need to pander to Khalistanis in order to get themselves elected. But they're not looking at the facts. They're being, if you'll forgive me, just plain dumb. If they looked at the fact, they would find, for example, that in most of Canada, being a Khalistani is not an advantage when it comes to the elections. It's a disadvantage. It's a handicap. What happens, I'll give you one quick example. Ujjwal Dosanjh, you probably know the name, the most successful Sikh politician in Canada of his generation. A man who, by the way, in a newspaper interview a couple of days ago, described Trudeau as an imbecile on this very point. He was elected, Assange, I mean. Assange was elected and re-elected in a heavily Sikh riding in Vancouver South for 20 years. Does that sound like it's a liability to be an enemy of the Khalistanis? No, it doesn't. There are very, very few Khalistanis who have really been successful, at least if they confess to being Khalistanis. If they conceal it, then they have a better chance of getting elected. The point I'm making is that you're asking, how do we explain their influence? I'm putting to you that we must consider a rather embarrassing explanation, that the politicians are just plain dumb. They don't get it. They don't know the history. They don't know what the Khalistan movement is all about. All they know and all they need to know is they say they represent the Sikhs, and they believe it. But the majority of people of Indian heritage and Sikh heritage in Canada, as you know, they're not Khalistani.
But this is bewildering, Terry, because as we speak, we've got a list of statements coming in from the Canadian political leadership here. And what is of most concern is the fact that for instance, if the leader of the ruling party has a brain fave or comes up with a colossally wrong electoral policy here, one would expect that his leader of the opposition, the man who chooses to, or at least stands to gain the most with his opponent going wrong, would capitalize on it. Instead, and we'll try and play those statements again, from Mr. Pierre Poilievre to Mr. Trudeau and a whole list of Canadian MPs, none of them have had the gumption or the courage to mention the word Khalistani separatism here. What makes them so scared? I don't think it comes down to a lack of intelligence or them playing dumb, Mr. Mileski. Are they really scared of perhaps the fact the snake they've bred in the background has become too difficult to control?
You got it. They're scared as well as dumb. They're scared that there will be trouble. There might even be violence. They have been intimidated, and it suits them just fine as long as they're getting elected. Sorry, I wish I had a more complicated, elaborate explanation, but I've been covering this for 20 years. I think they're both dumb and scared.
I don't even know what to make of those very blunt words coming in from you, Terry. Thanks. Do stay on with us. Let me bring in Dr. Swasti Rao as well. Dr. Swasti Rao, there is an often known theory in political science and international relations which talks about the security dilemma, especially the internal aspect of a security dilemma, where a ruling power often invents a global problem to try and unite the country or stem over internal crises or internal rebellions here. But this is something which has gone far beyond an external threat, despite what Mr. Trudeau might try to portray it as something of India trying to foment problem. This is now very clearly a law and order problem where you have people who hold Canadian passports attacking other people who hold Canadian passports on Canadian soil, yet the police is conspicuous by its absence or lack of action.
Absolutely. A very good evening to you and thank you for your question. Let's understand that the diaspora community of Sikhs constitutes about 2 to 2.1% of Canada's total population. And frankly, they make up a significant voting bloc, of course. And in fact, there are more Sikhs in Canada today, Canada's cabinet, than there are in India. So that's all fine. But to conflate all Sikhs as Khalistanis and vice versa is where the problem has begun. And my simple question to everybody out there in Canada, including Prime Minister Trudeau, is that we really appreciate his sensitivity about the Hindus getting attacked for apparently no rhyme or reason. But the simple question that I wish to ask him is that why has the government not made any arrests? Why has the government not done anything that pertains to proving that Canada is indeed a place of rule of law? I mean, when it came to calling out against India without having any hard evidence of sorts, I think it was extremely forthcoming. But now when things are very, very evident, I mean, these people that they have somehow mollycoddled in the name of electoral politics or electoral benefits are there to sort of damage their own societies. I mean, why is the government not making any arrests? That is a simple thing that I think every Indian and every level-headed person would ask. So that is something that we definitely need an answer. We seek an answer, and you obviously saw the Prime Minister's tweet about it, which is that Prime Minister's post on X about it, which is that everybody is extremely concerned. That's the first part. The other part is that I think it is high time that the Canadian Canadian, scholars, Canadian analysts actually come out and start identifying this problem that they have been trying to, somewhere nourish and nurture for the last 30, 40 years. I mean, why on earth does a country like Canada actually do that? And this is also a question to Terry. I mean, I was just hearing what he was saying, and I've been following his work, and I think he's extremely, I would say, very forthcoming in analyzing the problem. But I would like to understand, why isn't the Canadians seem to be, bothered about this? This is actually a law and order problem. And as far as to your question is concerned about the security dilemma, I would say that yes, I think there's enough evidence now to show that Justin Trudeau's government has indeed been trying to basically divert attention from the interference caused by China on the one hand. On the other, you know that we've been discussing on your channel as well that there's been a massive problem with respect to
Yeah.
infrastructure, with respect to housing, with respect to other economic problems in Canada. And somehow the Canadian side has just found it kosher to just go after world's largest democracy in the most demeaning manner possible and make a caricature of everything. So I think we all know that there is a kind of an electoral conspiracy out there, but as to why is the Canadian side letting that happen is something that really beats any logic whatsoever. So back to you, and I think that's an open question to the Canadian side, and I would really expect an answer. Thank you.
Well, I will, of course, get Terry in on that, but I also want to get in my other panelists as well. Pritpal Singh Baliawal, spokesperson of the BJP. Let me try and try and play the devil's advocate at this point for Canada at this point, because perhaps where India has gone wrong is the fact that it has failed to counter the narrative that Sikhs abroad globally are seeking Khalistan. Now, we know that is not the case. We know that hardly any Sikh, especially any Sikh in India, actually wants a separate homeland such as Khalistan. We know that this is a diaspora problem which has been fomented mischievously for decades and centuries, for decades, if not even more. However, the point remains when it comes to optics, and I say this as someone who covered a similar protest by Khalistani lumpins in London, different country, I know different situation here, but what I saw on the ground last year was the same thing. The local sentiment, the local narrative seems to look at them as rebels, someone who, a community which wants the freedom, community which is being persecuted. Somehow it seems we have not been able to control this global narrative.
Hello, Mr. Bhattacharya, and to all the panelists. Today, I am speaking on behalf that I am a Sikh. Firstly, I am a Sikh. And no Sikh in the world never think that he will attack any temple or any religious place of worship. I have to quote the Guru Tegh Bahadur, Matar them in this thing when they have given his shahad for the safety of the Hindus and all the things. But the way the Canadian government and Mr. Trudeau had finished this relationship with India due to few people and only for the what you can say that the way he is losing losing his elections. That's not the kind of what we can say. Hello. Hello. Hello.
Yes, please go on. We can hear you, Pritpalji. Mr. Pritpal Singh, we can hear you. Please continue. All right. We'll try and restore that connection with Pritpal Singh, but let me also get in Ambassador Sikri at this point. Ambassador Sikri, this now represents a diplomatic dilemma because in the last few weeks, India's response, and very justifiably so, has been to scale down its diplomatic presence in Canada and expel the diplomatic presence in India as well, and to try and severely downgrade bilateral relations. However, the fact remains that Canada is not a Pakistan nor an Afghanistan led by the Taliban where you can pretend to not acknowledge the country and get away with it. India has a sizable human presence in Canada, and I'll come to the question of students and migrants later. But in terms of the fact that even if you look at the sizable Hindu diaspora in Canada, which is repeatedly facing these attacks by Khalistani separatists here, how do we balance the dilemma or the diplomatic tightrope of scaling down and sending a message bilaterally, but also maintaining a sizable stand or a position of strength or support to the Hindu diaspora?
Well, that's very clear and very easy to answer because the fact is the reason we have scaled down the diplomatic presence is because the Trudeau government made this absolutely unacceptable and unprecedented mistake of naming our High Commissioner in Canada as a person of interest. This has probably never been done in any country before, which means that naming the Indian High Commissioner as being involved in what he says, in what the Prime Minister of Canada says, are just credible allegations, nothing to do with any evidence. Now, once that happened, there was no choice except for India to call back our High Commissioner, and we have expelled the Canadian High Commissioner to Delhi. So this downgrading of the relationship was brought about directly by the step taken by the Prime Minister Trudeau government. Now, what has happened in the temple in Brampton is something where there was the consular camp being held. That consular camp was being held organized by the Indian High Commission authority, the diplomats who are still there in Canada. And this consular camp is a regular routine affair being held by our consular officers, not only in Canada, but in other places where there are large Indian populations. They are helping the Canadians of Indian origin, and helping the Indians who are permanent residents in Canada. So, helping them with their consular work. And a request for this was given to the Canadian authorities, and security was asked for. Security was requested. But Prime Minister Trudeau ignored all of that. His police ignored all of that and allowed the Khalistanis with their very prominent flag to come in, break the temple gate, attack the people inside. And when the Hindu community protested, it is them who were attacked by the police. In fact, we have visuals I have seen where the Canadian police are shown carrying sticks and beating up people. And actually, and even in the although I do hear that now 3 people have been named as responsible for these attacks, none of them have mentioned the word Khalistan. And on the other hand, the Peel Regional Police is being praised for being so good about it. So I think many Canadian citizens, I've seen one comment by Daniel Broadman saying that there is now 2-tier policing in Canada, where the police itself has been so deeply infiltrated by the Khalistanis that they don't take action against the Khalistanis, and instead they're blaming the Hindus. One of the reasons I've seen, one of the analysis I've seen, that this is part of an attempt in Canada to divide the Hindus and the Sikhs. And Honorable Minister Veena Sikri made a statement about this, that this is a deliberate attempt to divide the Hindus and the Sikhs, because as you know, the Hindus and the Sikhs have always had very cordial relations. They celebrate all their events together, and socially they're very, very close. But this attempt is to divide them on political grounds, break them up into 2 groups so that they're easy to manipulate in the elections. And the fewer the Sikhs who are there, they are controlled by the Khalistanis because they control the Gurdwaras. The Khalistanis control the Gurdwaras. All the financing for human trafficking and drug trafficking, which is their activity, is done through the Gurdwaras. And then the Gurdwaras are controlled by the Khalistanis, and it's much easier through that to control the Sikh community. Now, this is something of a very deep political ploy, which is being played into even by the leader of the opposition in Canada, the Conservative leader Poilievre. He has also cancelled the Diwali celebrations in Parliament, and he too is hesitating to name the Khalistanis as being responsible for the attack on the temple in Brampton. So I do think that this is something that Prime Minister Trudeau started last year when he said the so-called credible allegations against India in the Hardeep Singh Nijjar killing, at a time when his own police was defining that killing as a gang war within Canada by different Khalistani groups, all aimed at controlling various Gurdwaras. And this is what it is. But the Canadian Prime Minister had the gall to ask India to provide the evidence for the credible allegations that he was making. And of course, India said, you give us the evidence. And there is the Five Eyes initiative. There is UK, USA, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. Canada has been able to get the support of USA and UK, and both of them have supported Canada. But both Australia and New Zealand have told the Canadian that give us evidence and then we'll make a statement on this. So Canada is isolating themselves in the global community. People are not happy with what's happening. Certainly in India, what Canada is doing is creating a lot of anger among the people of Punjab and among others. So I think that while Prime Minister Trudeau is driving himself into the ground on this one, India has been correct in taking a stronger stand. I'm sure there'll be even more strong statements and action taken by the Indian side, because our Prime Minister's statement is very strong.
But there is
come out today. I'm glad it has. and we will maintain our.
But there is a counter. There is a consequence to that as well, Ambassador Sikri, and I'll touch upon that point as well. But let me go back to Terry, who's been here listening into these comments being made by my Indian guest. Terry, it's evident from what at least Dr. Rao and Ambassador Sikri point out that the Canadian political class, whether it be Mr. Trudeau, whether it be Mr. Poilievre, they have chosen sides. They've actively chosen to side or at least turn a blind eye to the extremist Sikh community by consciously looking away when, in terms of either cancelling events of Diwali with the Hindu community, like what Mr. Poilievre did, or at least turning the blind eye when the Hindu community is being targeted. So, are you still certain that this comes down to an act of stupidity or at least playing dumb? Is this not a concerted choice that they've seen perhaps what is the more influential community and they've made a very dangerous choice which may work out well for either of them for the elections or even may work out for Jagmeet Singh as well, but at the end of the day creates a security hydra which will be very difficult to put down?
Well, there is such a thing, I suppose, as deciding to be dumb. Let me just give you one little example, which I think cuts to the heart of this problem. I can remember covering a story just before the 2015 election, which brought Justin Trudeau to power in Canada. And there was a walkout of Amritdhari, baptized Sikhs, long-time Liberal Party members in the riding of Vancouver South, who Jules Assange is riding. They walked out of the party on the eve of an election. That's a pretty gutsy thing to do. Dozens of them walked out of the Liberal Party to protest Khalistani influence in the party imposed by Trudeau's lieutenant in British Columbia, who was the former president of the World Sikh Organization, a separatist group, as you know, and by his boss, Justin Trudeau. They decided they wanted their candidate, and they imposed him on the local members who walked out. And when I asked them about this, Trudeau's staff, his chief of staff, as a matter of fact, said to me, well, Terry, I guess you're doing a story about how the Sikhs are taking over the Liberal Party. No, you've got it backwards. The story is about the Sikhs leaving the Liberal Party in protest against the Khalistanis. They didn't get it. They thought that they divided them into good Sikhs and bad Sikhs, and the good Sikhs were the ones who were there to help them out at election time, and they didn't understand the difference. They didn't understand that the people who were walking out were the people that they should have been siding with, not the people that they were imposing upon the peaceful majority. That's an anecdote, but it's been repeated all across the country. They don't understand what they've been bringing forward in the Liberal Party and the other parties. It's not just the Liberals. For 40 years now, this has been going on, and it's been working for them. Why would they question it? They managed to get themselves elected somehow. Maybe the Sikhs did it. Maybe that's what they think.
Okay. Dr. Rao, then let me just work it backwards here. It's evident there was a communication breakdown for the past several years between the Modi administration and the Trudeau administration. You can come up with several reasons, justifiably so also, as to why perhaps the Trudeau administration decided to put domestic interests first at the altar of good ties with India. But then could India have done better to leverage, as Terry put it, the good Sikhs, or at least its own Indian diaspora, to counter this narrative, which, let's be honest, has taken deep roots globally about the persecuted poor Sikh wanting his own homeland, which makes it such an attractive target for the white, generous white man who loves to bring democracy to the other countries and at the end of the day bring those countries to disrepair?
Well, I mean, I don't think anybody's stopping Canadians from actually getting into the nitty-gritty of what the Khalistan issue is all about. And secondly, how many real, genuine Khalistani supporters are there in the world today? I mean, they are, I think, intelligent enough to understand that this
perhaps
is
we're asking too much of them, Dr. Rao, to actually try and understand the snake they're trying to breed?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying. I said nothing really stops them from getting into the nitty-gritty of really examining the Khalistani relevance today, seeing that in the state of Punjab, at least in India, there are no takers for such nonsense. Okay, and why is it that they are unnecessarily nurturing this idea for the sake of their own electoral benefits, also making this false equivalence between Sikhs on the one hand. There are also extremely patriotic, and we know Sikhs, right? I mean, they are in huge numbers in the armed forces, in every walk of Indian society as proud Indians. So Sikhs, on the other hand, and conflating all Sikhs as Khalistani. So this is a problem, I guess, that this is for Canadians to fix. The second and important thing that we need to be talking about is that, in 2016, Mr. Trudeau, remember, we've been having this long discussion about how the Canadians themselves are sick of, Mr. Trudeau, and he would want somebody else now to win the elections whenever they happen, and we are hoping that there would be elections in 2025. But not many people here in India realize that actually Trudeau did not step down on the 20th of October. And why? Because in 2016, the Liberal Party under Justin Trudeau had revised its rules that the party leader remains immune to any challenge to his leadership so long as he is Prime Minister. So frankly, there's very little that anybody in Canada can do as long as he continues to be Prime Minister. And by the way, you can also see that overconfidence all over Mr. Trudeau now that he has announced that he is going to be leading the Liberal Party into the next elections, which basically, tells us Indians that actually, if you look at the domestic narrative inside of Canada or the discussions inside of Canada, I think contrary to what we might, assume, that they do not seem to be very interested in fixing their ties with world's largest democracy, which is ultimately in their larger interest as well. So I would not have too many hopes, but at the same time, I do hope that at least in this particular incident, which is very, very concerning and very, very grave, at least the rule of law will prevail and the Canadian side will make the right kind of arrests and hold the people accountable for this heinous crime. This is my least expectation. And as far as larger Canadian politics is concerned, it is for the Canadian people to decide. But I would, hold my opinion there because I don't see a lot of democratizing.
But I mean, again, Dr. Rao, let's look at the choices. I mean, I really feel bad for the Canadian people because let's look at the choices, whether it be Justin Trudeau, whether it be Jagmeet Singh, whether it be Pierre Poilievre. Nobody really seems to be taking a stand in terms of for internal security, something who would really look to call a spade, and we have seen a whole slew of statements here. Nobody even wants to address the elephant in the room, and that is sad. But speaking of elephants in the room, let me come to you, Ambassador Sikri, for my last question here, something which is very important, and I need you to answer this, give a very focused answer here. There is an Indian stake also, because if you look at the great Canadian dream, the Indian influx in Canada has increased to a point where in 2022 itself we had about 1.28, almost 1.2 lakh Indian immigrants in Canada. And Indians right now make up the highest number of Indian immigrants, international immigrants, with a percentage of 44%. Any decision India now takes, whether it be to downgrade bilateral ties, whether it be to call out Trudeau internationally, we cannot afford to neglect the fact that there is a sizable human Indian stake also involved in Canada, and it's their security which is at risk here, and it's not something we can just abandon.
Absolutely. We are not ignoring that at all. I do not see how you get the impression that we are ignoring that. It is because of our concern for the human element, the Canadians of Indian origin and the large number of Indian NRIs, people who are living there with permanent residency. We want to assure their dignity. We want to assure their security. And that is why our Prime Minister has made such a strong statement today. It is absolutely a very clear, unequivocal statement that we will not accept what is happening because it goes against all norms. I mean, the Canadian government announcing that even the few Indian diplomats who remain there will be under audio and video surveillance. This is against all norms of the Vienna Convention. No diplomats posted in any country can be treated like that. And in fact, it is to highlight to Canada that Canada calls themselves a democracy, but they cannot get away with such undemocratic and discriminatory acts targeting India for their own internal political purposes. They think they are serving their internal political purposes by catering to the Khalistanis, by dividing the Hindus and the Sikhs, as Dr. Teddy Milinsky was just saying. But actually, they are alienating themselves on the global scene. And they are proving to the rest of the world that they're not democratic at all. But actually, Prime Minister Trudeau is doing this a lot because he's favoring China. And he's trying to hide China's interference in Canada, in their elections, in their internal affairs. And he's doing this because of that. So there's strong domestic political concerns that he is pandering to. But we are being completely equally strong in making sure that the interests of the Indian community there, both the Canadian Indians and the Indian NRIs are being protected and will continue to be protected. That is why we're calling out the Canadian police. That's why we're calling out.
All right.
Look at the flags. You see the flags in the visuals. But nobody's talking
Absolutely.
about the fact that they're Khalistani flags. Everybody knows they are, that they're in all meetings, but nobody's
Yes.
talking about it. So I think we have to call out the Canadian diplomats as
Well, the
Canadian
sooner the Canadian
politicians.
government
Yes, the Canadian
Well,
government.
the sooner the Canadian government and the Canadian political leadership acknowledges the fact that what they have is a domestic problem and not something which they can try and pass on to India, the better it is for their country, for their security as well. And of course, at least the better it is for our Indians who are stuck in Canada here and have to deal with the consequences of a diplomatic mess that has gone on for far too long. Ambassador Sikri and Dr. Swastika, thank you so much for joining us also. Thank you, Terry, for having joined us as well. And also apologies, Mr. Pritpal Singh, we had network connections with you. We couldn't get more of you. But that's it for me on this.